Welcome to the Oral History of Criminology project. We are here today in Baltimore, Maryland at the meeting of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences in 2019. My name is Bob Bohm, and I'm pleased to interview my good friend Gregg Barak of Eastern Michigan University about his life and distinguished career in criminology and criminal justice. Before I have Gregg respond to some questions, I'd like to highlight some of Gregg's many career accomplishments. Gregg completed his entire post-secondary education at the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned an A.B. in criminology in 1970, a master's degree in criminology in 1971, and his Doctor of Criminology in 1974. His first academic position was as an assistant professor at Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania, followed by an assistant professorship at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas, a lecturer's position with the University of Maryland's European Division, and as an associate professor and chair at Aurora University in Illinois. He moved from Aurora University to Alabama State University in 1985 as a professor and chair of the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice. While at Alabama State, he designed and secured approval for the first graduate criminology program in the state of Alabama. In 1991, he moved to Eastern Michigan University as professor and head of the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminology. He is currently a professor on the Eastern Michigan University faculty. During his long career, Gregg has received several awards and honors, including 2 awards from the American Society of Criminology's Critical Criminology Division: the Critical Criminologist of the Year Award in 1999 and the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2007. He also was elected chairperson of the ASC's Division of Critical Criminology in 1997. He was named a Fellow of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences in 2003. In 2004, he was appointed Visiting Distinguished Professor and Scholar at Eastern Kentucky University, and in 2016, he received a Fulbright Award to Pontifical Catholic University in Brazil. 3 of his books have received awards or other recognition: Unchecked Corporate Power: Why the Crimes of Multinational Corporations Are Routinized Away and What We Can Do About It, published by Routledge, received the Outstanding Book Award by the American Society of Criminology's White Collar and Corporate Crime Division in 2017. Theft of a Nation: Wall Street Looting and Federal Regulatory Colluding, published by Rowan and Littlefield, received the White Collar Crime Research Consortium and the National Center for White Collar Crimes Outstanding Publication Award in 2012. And Give Me Shelter: A Social History of Homelessness in Contemporary America, published by Prager, was named to the Choice List of Outstanding Academic Books for 1991. I also should mention that a variant of his dissertation, In Defense of Whom, A Critique of Criminal Justice Reform, was published by Anderson in 1980. I would be remiss if I also didn't mention the tremendous job Gregg did as my program chair for the 30th anniversary meeting of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences in 1993. Gregg has served on or is serving on the editorial boards of a dozen academic journals. This year, Gregg became the co-founding editor of the Sage Journal of White Collar and Corporate Crime. Gregg probably is best known for his scholarship. He has authored or edited 18 books, 4 of which I have already mentioned, 46 book chapters or reprinted articles in books, 35 journal articles, and numerous essays, book reviews, and op-ed pieces. Regarding his many op-ed pieces, as well as his sundry radio and television interviews and guest speaking engagements, Gregg has regularly engaged in news-making criminology, a term he coined in his seminal article, Newsmaking Criminology, Reflections on the Media, Intellectuals, and Crime, published in Justice Quarterly in 1988. Gregg has participated as presenter, chair, and discussant at numerous professional academic meetings, especially the annual meetings of the American Society of Criminology and the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. He also has been invited to speak in 9 foreign countries, including Canada, the United Kingdom, Finland, Taiwan, the Netherlands, Germany, Brazil, Sweden, and Argentina. Gregg's newest book, Chronicles of a Radical Criminologist Working in the Margins of Law, Power, and Justice, is autobiographical and is a good reference for my first question. Gregg, why criminology? Why did you choose criminology as your lifetime pursuit? Who and what were your major influences?
Thank you, Bob, for that lovely introduction. Why criminology? I didn't choose criminology. I would say that criminology seduced me. It chose me. Had I not transferred after my freshman year at the University of California at Santa Barbara to Berkeley, quite candidly, I wouldn't have known that criminology even existed. It was only when I got to Berkeley and found that there was a school of criminology, and I was planning to attend law school after undergraduate school, and I learned that it really did not matter what you majored in to go to law school. I took an elective course from Herman Schwendinger on juvenile delinquency in 1967, and I decided that I would major in criminology, pretty much listening to Schwendinger. I guess there's a little story behind that. It was High's first semester teaching at Berkeley, and it was my first semester as a student at Berkeley as a sophomore. And I'm taking his class, and he's repeatedly talking about his doctoral research, what he did in Southwest LA. And he conducted his work in the years when I was in junior high in the same territory. And the cohorts of people that he's talking about, and the people, because he's looking at middle class affluent communities, and he's looking at underclass marginal communities, and he's trying to see relationships between gang behavior. So he's talking about everything that I knew, and it was an instant connection that he knew what was going on in my life 5 years earlier. He used jargon and argot that we were using, surfers, grimmies, badasses, our terminology for identifying one another, he was using, and he immortalized that. Julie and he did in their 1985 book, Adolescence and Delinquency. So that's a long answer. Other influences were Paul Takagi and Tony Platt, my mentor, who I'll probably talk about again.
Okay. You clearly identify and are identified with radical or critical criminology. What is radical or critical criminology to you? And what does it mean to be a radical or a critical criminologist?
Okay, in terms of labels and identity, in a sense, these are nomenclatures that we as criminologists have picked up and have used, and they have, specific meanings to us. I mean, I'm trying to dodge the answer before I give the answer, because I want to say that while I've labeled myself a radical or a critical criminologist, I've also labeled myself a feminist criminologist, an integrative criminologist, a global criminologist, and a peacemaking criminologist. Having used those labels, I would say that to differentiate critical and radical from mainstream or conventional criminology is to look at the world and approach the world of crime differently. Okay, by that, it's less about understanding the objective material world as much as it's about understanding the world of emotion, the world of culture, the world of beliefs. It's a more subjective approach to the study of law, power, and justice. It's not linear. It's an approach to criminality, to crime control, to justice that is interactive, that is reciprocal, that is dialectical, that is not linear. And that's how I distinguish it from positivist or classical criminology. Mainstream criminology is trying to be independent, is trying to be neutral, is trying not to take sides. Allegedly does not have an agenda, but if I were to get into it, the agenda is sort of maintaining where we're at. Critical criminologists are about change. The kind of change that you're talking about, it could be within the existing system or to overturn or transform that system. That to me is a radical criminologist who says the solutions to crime and crime control are caught up in the political and economic relationships, arrangements, institutions, and structures, and that ultimately to resolve or improve those conditions substantially, you would have to change the mode of production.
Okay. You think it's helpful to distinguish between politically conservative, politically liberal, and politically radical positions?
Well, sure. I mean, the implications of them are
with regard to criminology.
With regard to criminology, you just said liberal, conservative, and radical.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, to go over that territory again. I mean, it's a question of whether you are taking the state's point of view in terms of what is a harm, what is a crime, and most mainstream as opposed to critical or radical criminologists are using the law as their statement of what the problem is, and there may be things that are within the law that are not enforced. There may be things that are not defined by the law that are more harmful. So, what your object of inquiry is very different between the two. One is much more constrained, one is much more open to human rights, to other ways of discussing harm, and other ways of discussing victimization. One is more open to looking at organizations and corporations and institutions as propagating crime and crime control as opposed to the individual.
You've studied and written about several different subjects in a sort of chronological order. They include criminal justice reform, state criminality, homelessness, newsmaking criminology, media crime and justice, O.J. Simpson, criminal justice and mass culture, criminological integration, globalism of crime and crime control, class, race, gender, and crime, violence and nonviolence, and white-collar and corporate crime. You've covered a lot. Is there a central theme around which all of your work coheres, or are there several smaller agendas?
Well, I guess the answer is both of those things. There's smaller agendas that are constituent parts of a larger whole, which has to do with the consumption and the production of crime and crime control. So I'm examining either the political and economic arrangements of a phenomena, or I'm examining the social relations of a phenomena. I'm looking at what goes into the consumption and the production of these two phenomena and the relationships between them. And the linchpin is that I'm really doing a political economy of crime and crime control.
Okay. Which of your contributions do you look back on with the most pride, and why?
I guess the easiest thing, I can talk about my individual works. I can talk about work as an editor and as a collaborator, and those are all sort of different things. So on an individual level, it would probably be the 3 books that you identified that received awards. I mean, and the reasons for that, well, Give Me Shelter back in '91, I wasn't really a person who studied homelessness. I was a criminologist, but it was doing work in the community, and I got on some community boards, and I became an advocate and provided shelter, for the day, and then permanent shelter. And lo and behold, that evolved into a book. So it wasn't something that I planned on doing, and I take a lot of pride in it because I took a value-laden position, and I was trying to articulate the position of the homeless advocates. And so it was satisfying to be able to pull that off. It was a social problem, and it was dealing with fairness and justice. And the other 2 books are also dealing with fairness and justice. And what they all share in common is these social problems can best be understood through a political economy. These books were all recognized by either peers or by others outside of the field. So there's satisfaction in that.
With regard to the homelessness book, though, you took a very interesting and certainly at the time an unorthodox position with the relationship between homelessness and crime. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think Bob wants me to talk about how, we juxtapose the crimes of the homeless versus the crime of homelessness. And so we were trying to make a case that was a position that should be criminal in and of itself. And some of the interesting parts were that there were state commonwealths, I don't remember particularly which ones, that really put the onus, the burden on the government to not allow people to be in that state. So you had some legal grounds in some state constitutions where you could make such an argument. But the argument was really more philosophical than anything else, and it was to point out that very few of the homeless were committing crimes, although there were crimes among them. Most of them were being victimized by others.
Okay. So getting back to the other contributions of which you're particularly proud of.
Right. I'm proud of series that I've been involved in editing. I did one with Roman and Littlefield, a crime and justice series, and I'm currently doing one with Crimes of the Powerful with Rutledge. And why I take satisfaction in that is I like to work with others to help bring their books to fruition. In that regard, I'm probably most pleased about turning young scholars' dissertations into their first books. And so there's a lot of satisfaction in doing that. And then there were one other collaborative project that I was pleased with, because I never pulled it off myself because they didn't have all the tools in my command. And this was a study that I did with Judge Shelton and young Kim, an assistant professor who could crunch numbers with the best of them. And the judge and young Kim and myself did two studies of jurors in Ann Arbor, Michigan and Detroit, Michigan, to demystify the CSI effect on jurors. And it was a lot of fun because when we started out this project, it was really the judge's project. Like most of the prosecutors and most of the defense attorneys and most of the judges, they all thought that the CSI was making the bar higher for prosecutors to get a conviction, and the defense attorneys said it was lowering the bar and making it easier. And the judges, lo and behold, shared the point of view of the prosecutors. We turned out and proved from lengthy studies and that the jurors could distinguish better what was real on TV and what was not. And while they may have expected certain things, it didn't influence their decisions. And so at the end of the day, we found that the program had more effect on the prosecutors and on the judges and on the defense attorneys because they started to change their opening and closing statements, and they were more moved by these series than folks. And it was interesting when we first did the study, the criticism was, well, you did this in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you had all this high IQ with people with master's degrees, and everybody was educated, and so they could make that. So they pushed us to go to Detroit. We found that in Detroit, they were more savvy tech-wise than in Ann Arbor, and there was absolutely no difference in their kinds of responses, so that shut a lot of people up. And that work, coincidentally, probably has the most mileage of any work because of serendipity. One of those things was when the first article came out in the Vanderbilt Journal of Law and of Entertainment and Technology Law. 4 days later, Scooter Libby was convicted for outing the CIA agent, and a legal blog linked that decision in our research, and it went viral, and we started doing magazines and newspapers, and then the Department of Justice featured the work at their NIJ website, and then the judge did a thing, and then eventually one other thing. 4 years later, and these three articles have had more than 10,000 downloads. That's like more than anything that we have done before, just because forensic people, attorneys, they all are interested. For years, the people wanted to borrow the questionnaires, they wanted to reproduce this thing because they just didn't want to not think that there was this effect. The real CSI was a Frontline special that aired 4 years later with the judge for a 15-minute segment, and that got wide circulation. So,
before we leave this question about the contributions that you're most proud of, I can think of one of your projects that I'm sure that you're probably most proud of that you haven't mentioned.
Right.
And that's your daughter Maya, who is a young criminologist herself. You care to mention anything about that project?
that project, where do I begin? Wonderful Maya Pagny Barak. Didn't start out to be a criminologist. If we would have tried to lure her into the field, it would have never happened. She sort of came in through the back door. We were very fortunate. She grew up in Ann Arbor. She went to preschool at Eastern Michigan, and then she went to public school, community high, and she went to the U of M and did a social anthropology undergraduate, and was applying to social graduate schools. And her mentors told her that she could go anywhere, but at age 19 or 20 when she was coming out, she couldn't, so she didn't get into these very elite Stanford, Berkeley, Yale social programs. And Dad said, well, why don't you come over to Eastern and pick up a master's and reapply later. So she came and became a student at Eastern Michigan, and I'm always pleased to say this. She got to take theory from me, and she got to take global crim from me, and none of my colleagues ever raised a word about that. And where do I go with this? I go with one other story. She and I used to drive to work when she was going to preschool. And then when she was taking the graduate courses from me in the evening, and she didn't live with me any longer, my wife, Charlotte, she would come by, drop her dog off. We would drive over to class, and on the way we'd talk about the readings. And on the way home, she would critique Dad and the course, and in a very, daughter-father relationship. Anyway, she became a criminologist and came back after going to American University, and is an assistant professor in criminology and criminal justice at UM Dearborn. And her first book with her mentor on capital punishment lawyers, actually, is what it's about. So that brings you up to
I can certainly attest to the fact that her career has really started off with a real bang, and every indication indicates that she's probably going to give her father a run for his money when it comes to contributions to the field.
She could do that if she wanted to. I'm not sure she wants to, but she could certainly.
Well, it's going to be fun to see, isn't it?
Yes, it will.
Which of your contributions do you think have had the most influence on the disciplines of criminology and criminal justice, and why?
Yeah, that's almost like the ones that I'm proud of. I suspect that in a way news-making criminology left a mark just because it was picked up, it was quite popular, everybody sort of obligatorily had to think about it for a period of time. And then public criminology sort of came up, which is similar but not the same. One is about trying to change the narratives, and one is just trying to go public with what the truth is. And so probably news-making criminology maybe had the wider effect. I'd like to think, and in a way, where people do less work, it's easier to have a greater impact. So I'd like to think that my last couple of pieces of work moving into white collar and corporate crime, which I never wrote anything about white collar or corporate crime outside of textbooks, which was secondary kind of material, until the Wall Street implosion. And I got pulled in there, and so I wrote some books, and they got some awards because there's not a lot of people, unfortunately, doing more work in that field. In terms of what has probably had the most reads by students and professors is probably a co-authored book, Class, Race, Gender, and Crime, with originally Gene Flavin and Paul Layton, still with Paul Layton and now with Allison Cotton. And that book's moving into, it's in its 5th edition, will be in its 6th, and it's 20 years old. So a lot of students have read that book, so I guess that has influence.
Okay. Has any of your work received criticism, and if so, has it endured the criticism that it's received?
You know, either I'm in a state of denial or my memory isn't very good. I don't really see that my work has had, that much criticism. I mean, to a certain extent, I think some of the work has just been ignored by mainstream criminologists, and then by the crits, it's a sympathetic ear, so it hasn't really been, critiqued in any substance that I can recall. Maybe you can help me.
I don't know. Do you feel like you've been preaching to the choir, so to speak?
When I say that I haven't had criticism?
No, I mean when you say that that the mainstream segment of the discipline has essentially ignored your work, and the critical crim section of the work, section of the discipline has embraced it, but embraced it perhaps uncritically.
Well, that may be true. I mean, I can't make up the criticisms if it hasn't been there. I mean, whatever has been in print and whatever's been reviewed, no book that I've ever put out there has been negatively reviewed or panned. I mean, and there are mainstream people who have reviewed my stuff as well as not mainstream people, and they may take issue with the use of Marx and political economy and whether or not that's a theoretical construct or not, and I always think that's nonsense. Of course it is. So I mean, again, I've part of why the work sort of continues is because I've done in so many different arenas that I get picked up for one topic, homelessness, picked up for a media topic, picked up for a violence topic. I mean, so you're sort of all over the place. So that sort of keeps you alive. The integrative work, when I was trying to bridge modernism and postmodernism and come up with a postmodern synthesis, people were open to that, even in the mainstreamers. And part of this to me is somewhat a false dichotomy, and I don't want people to think that I don't utilize both methods and theories from mainstream, positivist, or classical. I mean, to me, all of these ideas, they interchange with one another. So they're not exclusive.
Well, I mean, it seems to me, and it sounds to me, that to be fair and honest, your work has successfully appealed to a wide range of audiences, and that perhaps that's why it has escaped any serious criticism.
That may be true. I do a little bit of work and then I get out of Dodge and I move on to something. Else.
You're hard to pin down, huh?
Right, maybe.
To what do you attribute your work's sustaining presence and influence in the field? You already mentioned that several of your books have gone through multiple editions.
No, only really one has gone through multiple editions, if you think about it. Only Class, Race, Gender, and Crime, not to correct you.
Okay, fair enough. Well, then let's move on. What would you say are the identifying characteristics, your identifying characteristics as a scholar? You feel that you can be pigeonholed in that way?
Well, people use the label radical, they use the label critical, they use the label interdisciplinary or integrative. Those are terms that I'm pleased that they identify me with as opposed to one only. And I self-identify with those terms, and I see when people write about my work that they use those labels to describe me. I'm thinking of this symposium that was in the Western Society of Criminology, where 6 criminologists came together to write essays based on theft of a nation. And when they would describe what I was doing, the mixture of people, those were, he's an interdisciplinary criminologist, he's a Marxist criminologist, he's a political economist. They would use those different labels, which is good because I'm really trying to include everything.
Yeah, for my part, I would say one of the characteristics that you're probably identified with is being a generous criminologist. The fact of the matter is you have given opportunities to many young criminologists to make contributions to your many anthologies and edited editions.
Yeah, now that you kind of bring that up, I'm aware of the fact that, let's say, I've helped about 175 people get published.
Wow.
And that may have something to do with one's longevity, people sort of being networked. They feel like they owe you or they're nice to you. So from that standpoint, it sort of goes around and it comes around. And I think that has a lot to do with it now that you bring that up.
Okay. For much of your career, you've served as a department head or chair. I'm sure that particularly younger criminologists and criminal justicians would like to know how you've been able to successfully juggle those administrative responsibilities with your impressive scholarly production, as well as teaching and service to the community and to the profession. Any advice?
Well, yeah, I have a few thoughts on that. I didn't really start producing a lot of scholarship until into the third management position. In the first decade that I did management, I wasn't doing a lot of scholarship. I was doing more activism, I was doing more community work, I was doing more news making. I wasn't really getting down to the books until early 90s, to tell you the truth, which was in the third job. The joke that I always tell people is I've always found administration to be far less labor intensive than teaching was. At least for me, I put in a lot more energy to teach than I did to run a department, even with 25 full-time faculty, another 25 part-time, 3 staff. To me, 10, 15 hours a week, and you could run a department, gave me a lot more time to do work. When I left administration in 96, I'd done it from 80 to 96, I was fortunate enough to be at Eastern Michigan University, and they had a system in place where if you were doing scholarly work and research, you could compete for internal releases. And this isn't at too many places where you get releases for funded money, but you don't get it for anything else but maybe a sabbatical periodically. So from 96 to the present, I've had about 6 years of time off to work, and that has given me all the time I've needed to do my work, really.
I've always thought you being very clever when it came to getting things done. When you worked as a program chair, for example, we had a tremendous program, and again, my hat is off to you by cleverly arranging the program, but I think you've done that throughout your career. I think that's why you were you've been such a successful manager wherever you've been. You've got the aptitude for that. So maybe that's one of the important qualities to have if you go into administration. What aspects of your career have you enjoyed the most, and why?
Actually, I'm mentoring. I like teaching an awful lot. One thing that I don't like online courses. I'm glad I'm not having to deal with that. All of my younger colleagues are all in that mode, and they're very happy with it, seems to me. So I like face-to-face instruction. I like working with my master's graduate students. I like working with senior thesis students. I liked, as I said earlier, helping young scholars with their dissertation, turning those into books. That's a real satisfying. So I enjoy that. In terms of the fact that I've been mobile, or at least I was mobile 6 or 7 times before I sat down in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti and stayed there for the last 25 years. But the variety of universities and being able to live in all the different parts of the country, that was very enjoyable. And I think my most fond position was Alabama State University in Montgomery, predominantly black institution. Because of all the places that I ever was or ever worked, I was most at home and most comfortable and could be myself, in part because politically my social justice agenda was the same as the brass at Alabama State University, and they saw me as a conduit for things they wanted to do.
Interesting. Would you have done anything differently, or would you do anything differently, or would you have done anything differently if you were beginning again?
Okay, this is one of these standard questions that's always in these scripted oral histories. And Bob and I last night were having dinner, and Bob threw that at me, and I said, no, I wouldn't. And he thought, yeah, you would. And so I got fired or not retained from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas back in the 1970s. And so Bob was thinking, well, you wouldn't have taken that job if you had it all over to do again. And he's also saying that because when he reads Chronicles of a Radical Criminologist, he senses the tremendous anger that I had over this non-retainment. And he also knows that there was a lawsuit, and I got a large sum of money, and I got a non-apology apology above the fold of the Las Vegas Review Sun, the Las Vegas Review Journal, the Las Vegas Sun. Where am I going with that? As hard as that was, I was validated. I thought I was struggling for academic freedom. I had support of some colleagues, and I had support of students. So in a way, that's sort of a fond experience to have been fired, but to have been vindicated to a degree.
Sounds kind of masochistic to me.
Some people would say that it is.
Okay, Greg, do you have any advice to young scholars, especially young aspiring critical criminologists?
I mean, in a way, it's sort of situational. I mean, I would have to take a person and sit down and say, like, what is it that you want to do with your career? And then I could do it. But in a generic kind of way, I think the most important thing is to find a place where your colleagues or the institution appreciates what it is you're doing. Okay, we all do such different things, and it's important that you are at a place that appreciates the type of work you're doing. And I think that is the key, because you get nourished, you get feedback, you get stroked, you get support, and you get the feeling that what you're doing, has value. And so if you're a qualitative person and they're a numbers cruncher, and nowadays everybody tries to play with both, but I don't think a lot of people do too much in that area. They're usually one way or the other. But it's to know what your institution is about, what it's doing, and situating yourself accordingly. I think that's the important thing.
Okay.
If you're looking for funded research and you're not a funded research person, you don't go to that institution.
Well, it's hard to be successful these days at almost any institution if you are not out seeking funded research.
Well, that raises an interesting question. I mean, to what degree are most criminologists, mainstream or critical, really being funded with their research? I mean, to me, that's always really a small percentage of the people, yes?
I would think so.
So most people succeed without it, is what I'm trying to say. Of course, you won't get to the flagship or the elite institution.
Yes, and times are changing too.
Right.
It's not like it was 40 years ago.
That's true. That's true.
Well, what would you suggest to future generations watching this recording about what it takes to achieve success in criminology or in criminal justice?
Like most things, do your homework, work hard, and if you work hard, this isn't rocket science. You can succeed. So
it's social science.
It is social science. It's true. It's a lot more artistic in my mind. But I guess it's really sort of know yourself. I mean, it's know why you're there and what your own goals and your objectives are. I don't know what I would tell younger generations. I mean, to me, the university is not the university that I knew when I started, okay? Where you came and spent the day, you had lunch with colleagues, you worked out at the gym, you were there 30 hours a week. Now you're there for a committee meeting if you have one, office hours if they're obligatory, and you teach your classes, and most people are working away from the institution. So it's not the same place to me that it once was. Now, I hate to sound like an old fart, but that's the difference. You're really working your own. You can be anywhere in this world now. You don't really have to be locked into your campus any longer. And universities don't, you said it's a different world. Universities don't invest as much as they once did in their faculty. And they're more dependent on contingent faculty. And they're going after online students, and the whole institution is changing. I don't know that I would want to be in that environment tomorrow. So how do people navigate that? I guess through Facebook.
Through what?
I guess through social media and Facebook. I'm not sure how they work that, but it's a different world to me. Go to your lounge. I mean, if you go to the university lounge, it used to be a place before there was an internet where in the refrigerator people kept their lunches, or they went out for a meal in the middle of the day or the end of the day. That kind of camaraderie doesn't seem to be there anymore. sometimes I think it's just me, and the younger generation are still doing all those things that I'm just not savvy.
Sounds like we need a study. Any tips on publishing for young scholars? You've been very successful at that.
Well, learn to work alone and learn to collaborate. I mean, that is the key, because in this day and age, if you just work with groups, you may not know how to put a whole thing together. If you work alone, you can do that. If you work alone, you can bring something to a group that you might otherwise not be able to do. So the key to publishing is to go it alone, but to also be able to work with others, because, you know, in this day and age, more and more people write collaboratively, and I think in a way that hurts people from writing the larger narratives, the larger pieces.
Do you have any general thoughts about the intellectual and professional state of our field? Are there any questions that the field ought to address that it isn't addressing?
Well, in a way, it seems to me that not a lot has changed in 50 years. To me, we were going back into the 60s, the early 70s, we were trying to bring attention to the crimes of the powerful, to white-collar and corporate crime, to the crimes of the state, to war crimes. And 50 years later, when I attend these meetings and I read the journals and I look at the books, the vast majority are still focused on the crimes of the powerless, the crimes of the oppressed, their victims, and we still as a field don't understand that the fundamental problem are the crimes of the powerful, and the field needs to spend more time and attention on that, in my view.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the interview now, and is there anything I haven't asked you that you think merits inclusion on the record?
I guess the answer is no. I mean, at the moment, this went by faster than I thought it would. No, I cannot think of anything.
Well, then I think that all is left then is to thank you for sharing a bit about your life and career with us. Thanks, Gregg. I enjoyed the exercise.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.